G'day ladies and gentlemen, I hope that everybody is doing well. On this special report, we're going to be talking about preference deals for cash. That's right here in our home of Victoria. I made a video introducing this notion a few weeks back, and in this video I'll be giving further insight into exactly how certain candidates and micro parties are able to part with a reported $20,000 to $55,000 in order to drastically increase their chances of getting elected. So I'm going to give you a bit of an insight as to how this works. So preference deals for cash, the Glen Durery model. Alrighty, so first of all, what we are talking about here are seats in the upper house here in Victoria. So just a little bit of an overview. The upper house has 8 regions in Victoria, and the ticket, as in the ballot paper, looks like this. So as you can see, it looks quite similar to the ballot paper used for the Senate election. Okay, you've got above the line and below the line, but there is a major difference in how upper house voting works here in Victoria. So when voting above the line in Victoria, you are only required to number a single box. That's right. And it's important to point out that if you vote more than one box above the line in this state election on the upper house ballot paper, your vote will be invalid. That's right. It is a requirement to only number one box when voting above the line. So why is that? Well, the reason for that is that prior to the election, parties actually submit what's called a group voting ticket to the VEC, which numbers their preferences. Okay, so in other words, when you vote one above the line in Victoria for the state election, it is not you, the voter, who is choosing your preferences. Those choices have been made by the party ahead of time. Now, what this results in is a scenario whereby voters can vote above the line for a certain party that fits within their political ideological outlook, and from that point forward, their vote could be transferred to a party that they would never vote for in a million years. And this has been happening time and time again throughout Victorian elections. So the group voting ticket, what exactly is it? So as mentioned, prior to the election, parties are required to submit their preference nomination to the VEC. Preferences, that is when you're voting above the line, are determined by parties, not voters. And when voting above the line, voters have zero say where their preferences go. That's right. And keep in mind, most people, when they go to the polling booth, they want to get in, get out, and that's it. So it's a very sneaky system, in my opinion. Victoria is the only state that allows this particular system to be in place. Every other state have actually gone through electoral reforms. That's right, including for the federal election. So the group voting ticket is only alive and well here in Victoria. So you have to wonder, why is that? There have been attempts by certain members of parliament to introduce legislation for electoral reform, but Daniel Andrews has not been interested in entertaining the idea. I don't know why that is. Why do you think? Put your thoughts in the comments. This is MCJ Report. Alrighty, so what this provides scope for is preference deals for cash. So how exactly do these deals work? Well, let's have a bit of a talk about that. What many parties do, as in micro parties, when they are dreaming about getting elected, is they will contact this guy right here. His name's Glen Durery. He is a self-described preference whisperer, and he offers a service, essentially helping micro parties and candidates to get elected, people who would never have a chance of getting elected on their own merit in the first place. So essentially the way it works is Glen Durery will capture a whole range of different micro parties under his banner that he refers to as the, quote, family. He will organize the preferences in a mathematical formula in order to almost guarantee that certain candidates will be elected. Now, the service is not free. That's right, it's definitely not free. The fee is reported to cost between $20,000 to $55,000. Okay, so under this umbrella of micro parties, you've got parties on the left, parties on the right, parties that are ideologically opposed to each other, essentially swapping preferences back and forth as ordered by Glen Durery. The group voting ticket is submitted prior to the election, and based on the flow of preferences, certain candidates from certain parties are almost guaranteed to get elected. Okay, so this explains why people like Rod Barton from Transport Matters, who achieved only 0.6% of the primary vote, was able to get elected because he had 8 parties preference him second. He was able to accumulate all of those preferences, and that got him over the line into Parliament. That's right. So again, no merit of his own. He just decided he'd fork out the money. So ladies and gentlemen, what this means is that if I almost can't say this, but if you are a political hopeful, and if you dream about being elected to Parliament, and if you happen to be able to scrounge up 500 members and you've got 30 to 50 grand in the bank, then you too can be elected to the upper house in Victoria. I know it sounds crazy, but it is actually just a very simple matter of fact. All right, so Glen Durery. So who is this guy? Where's he from? And what exactly does he want? So he calls himself the preference whisperer, but you can do a quick Google search and you can see that he's not really whispering at all. He very much enjoys speaking to the mainstream media, and there is absolutely no shortage of content matter on this guy. He's been in the game for a very long time, wheeling and dealing behind the scenes, and he's very, very well known in the political world, I'd say. I thought it was a little bit strange that he chose to describe himself as a preference whisperer, given, of course, that he is actually quite loud. So I thought I'd go and look up the definition of what is a whisperer. So according to Google, a person skilled in taming or training a specified kind of animal. That's right. So in this case, the specified kind of animal are political hopefuls and people who romanticize about walking down the halls of Parliament by any means necessary. That's right. That is the specified kind of animal who are the perfect clientele for Glen Durery. So we're going to have a bit of a talk about the Glen Durery model, how it works, and how it actually catapults these obscure candidates into Parliament. All right, so it's a fee for service, reported to range between $20,000 to $55,000. The model is based on something called, quote, preference harvesting, which involves trading preferences between parties that often hold opposing political ideologies for the objective of securing sufficient votes for paid clients to get elected. And once again, I have to stress that this model is only possible in Victoria, whereby voters are deprived the capability to choose their own preferences when voting above the line. All right, so folks, if you'd like me to send you all the references that I'm using in this presentation, go to mcjreport.com, sign up with your email address, and tomorrow I will send you all the links, because I can tell you that this is not a conspiracy theory. Now, there's a few problems with this model, and some people may say, well, he's not technically breaking the law, but I would argue that this is indeed unethical due to the underhanded nature of this particular model. So a couple of problems here before I get stuck into the meat of the presentation is that, first of all, democracy should not be for sale. All right, and when voters vote for a party above the line that is contracted to Durery, they are likely, without their knowledge, handing their preferences over to a party that they would never vote for. Okay? This model flies in the face of normal voter behavior, which demonstrates that voters number their preferences in accordance with their belief system and conscience. That's right. So what we see is that when Australians go to the ballot box, they will order their preferences in terms of their ideological political outlook. Okay, they don't order their preferences in terms of, let's just vote for all the micro parties first and we'll worry about the majors later. No, absolutely not. Okay, that is not what people do. So unfortunately, due to these underhanded group voting tickets, so many people in our state have shoveled off their preferences to a party that they were unaware of, that they would never vote for in a million years. Alrighty, now let's get stuck into some information about Glen Durery so you can know a little bit more about him, and so you can watch out in the upcoming state election, because I can tell you that Glen Durery is very active in Victoria right now, and he's speaking to a whole range of different parties, looking for a payday here, a payday there, swapping preferences in the background, doing what he does. And I dare say that he is hoping to pocket at least a few $100,000 in this Victorian state election, and it's not good. It's definitely not good. So we here at Freedom Party, we are not exchanging any money for preferences or anything like that. Not good. All right, so let's have a little bit of a talk about Glen Durery so you can understand a bit more about who he is, what he's doing, and what motivates him. All right, so coming from Wikipedia right here, Durery has been a candidate in several elections. He ran for the New South Wales Legislative Council in the 99 and 03 state elections, as a Liberals for Forests candidate for the Senate in the 2004 federal election, and as a Liberal Democrats candidate for the Senate in the 2010 federal election. Now, shortly after that election, Glen Durery had a falling out with the Liberal Democrats and really took exception to David Leyonhjelm. Take a look at this.
In 2007, he joined David Leyonhjelm's Liberal Democrats.
We used to describe him as a value for his own. We're a libertarian party, a classical liberal party. When we used to ask him, well, what do you actually believe in, Glenn? The answer was very vague. He would be very hard to be pinned down.
Durery's ruthless tactics have led to a series of fallings out with minor parties. He fell out with the LDP after missing out on a Senate seat in 2010, for which he blamed David Leyonhjelm.
I don't think he's made much study of political philosophy or understanding ideology or anything like that. So it comes naturally to him that if you want to get elected, you do what it takes to get elected.
Leyonhjelm also earned Durery's ire when the LDP chose not to preference the Shooters and Fishers Party highly last year.
He rang and left a message on my voicemail, on my mobile, saying, "You're politically dead. I will make sure that you never succeed in politics. This is my life's mission."
And as it turned out, those were not merely words there expressed by Glen Durery regarding his newfound apparent disdain for the Liberal Democrats. He was actually summoned here to a joint standing committee on electoral matters shortly after, where he made certain remarks about alleged practices from the Liberal Democrats. Here we go. He says right here, "There is a lot of room to improve the system to get rid of fraudulent behaviour like we have seen with the Liberal Democrats setting up and establishing front parties. That can be done very, very easily." And Glen Durery went on to detail exactly how it's done. And the interesting thing about these statements, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is exactly what Glen Durery himself has been accused of over the years. Maybe not establishing certain front parties for the purpose of harvesting votes from the right to the left and back and forth, but definitely encouraging others to establish these types of parties. Now, this is illustrated here through the Minor Party Alliance, which was formed by Glen Durery. And again, going back to Wikipedia, which helped more than 30 minor parties and independents with advice and guidance. All right, let's just call it advice and guidance regarding the complex political and electoral processes required for the preference harvesting scheme to work. Now, it's not actually that difficult or complicated, folks. I can show you a video breaking down the whole thing. And the truth is, if you have a calculator, then you can do it too. It goes on to say here, the preference harvesting deals organised by the Alliance for the 2013 Australian Senate election resulted in the election of candidates who received only 0.2% of the vote, the Australian Sports Party. All right, folks, so definitely involved there in a lot of micro parties. So I dare say that it's quite likely that several of the remarks made by Durery in this joint committee may have been a case of the pot calling the kettle black. I don't know for sure. I'm just throwing it out there. Once again, you are the audience. You make up your own mind. Alrighty, let's keep reading along here. All right, so back in 2014, motoring enthusiast Ricky Muir sacks Chief of Staff Glen Durery after actually hiring Durery services, and this man right here was able to get elected on only 0.5% of the vote. All right, so this bloke, Ricky, comes out of left field. No one knows who he is, gets catapulted into the Senate, hires Glen Durery, sacks him later, refuses to disclose the reason for why he made the decision to sack Durery. But it's also important to note that when political staffers are sacked, they are more than likely entitled to a fairly reasonable payout. Not saying that did happen, just saying it could happen. All right, anyway, moving along here. Alrighty, preference whisperer Glen Durery and lavish travel spend. This was an article published in 2021. I'm going to have a bit of a read to you. Controversial preference whisperer Glen Durery charged taxpayers more than $150,000 in travel and other expenses while working as an advisor to the then Senator Darren Hinch and also running a lucrative cash for votes business in state elections. I don't know, folks. Does that sound like a conflict of interest? Who knows? I'm just asking you. The travel expenses, the travel expense records obtained by the Sunday Age after a 2-year Freedom of Information battle revealed a dramatic hike in trips Mr. Durery took to Melbourne in 2018, coinciding with the Victorian election, where he made hundreds of thousands of dollars helping micro parties win the balance of power in the state's upper house. That's right. So if you're ever asking your question why the upper house in Victoria, the crossbench, is so obscure, well, now you know. All right, so moving along here, Glen Durery has a fairly extensive history with One Nation, but not the type of history that results in some sort of meaningful, productive relationship. Nothing like that. Have a look at this. Glen Durery says he's been directing micro-party preferences away from One Nation since 1999. That's right. So it appears, based on certain things that Glen Durery has said, that he really doesn't like One Nation at all. He considers it a community service to try and rid One Nation from Australia. Not sure why that is, but anyway, take a look at this footage.
What I've been doing to One Nation, I've been doing it for years, and that is my hand on their electoral throat, squeezing the preferential life out of them.
At a cafe in Canberra, the so-called preference whisperer is busy working on his long-held private mission.
You know, David, I like to think of what I do in working against One Nation as a community service. And I've been doing this community service free of charge now for about 20 years.
In the recent WA election, he gave the fluoride-free party a major leg up, but he draws the line at One Nation.
You ask why I do that? It's simply one word: racism.
He sees himself as a kind of white knight, working the micro-party preferences to, wherever possible, keep Pauline Hanson at bay.
Through my work, I've stopped her winning at a number of elections by simply denying preferences, putting Pauline Hanson last.
All right, so you heard it there, guys. That's pretty creepy language there used by Glen. I'm just going to read here, quote, "My hand on their electoral throat, squeezing the preferential life out of them." Kind of sounds like the words of somebody who doesn't have the best of intentions. What do you think, folks? That's a pretty interesting thing to say the least. All right, now anyway, moving along here, shortly after, and this was coming from SBS, 2017, a One Nation senator has used parliamentary privilege to accuse preference whisperer Glen Durery of threatening to, quote, tear out Pauline Hanson's throat. Now, Glen Durery never confirmed making the statements, but I don't know. There's a few things here that certainly don't seem right, if you ask me, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty, so this article was published back in 2018. Massive payday looming for the preference whisperer. Now, this is in regards to the Victoria state election that just passed, where Glen Durery was able to accumulate a very large stable of micro parties under his banner. 30 grand here, 30 grand there. And of course, we saw the biggest crossbench elected, I think, in Victorian history, with 11 crossbenchers. And this formation ended up working out quite well for Daniel Andrews, who was able to, I suppose, get what he wanted out of many of these crossbenchers in order to get what Daniel Andrews wanted, which of course was mostly in relation to the extension of the state of emergency and ultimately the Pandemic Management Amendment Bill to the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. All right, now just moving along here, this is an article here by the Sydney Morning Herald, published, Sydney Morning Herald? Yep, Sydney Morning Herald. Just thought I'd make sure. Published last year. Glen Durery actually made some remarks about myself and a couple of people I was working with at the time when we were seeking to establish a new political vehicle called RDA Party. Maybe some of you remember that. Raise your hands. And of course, that didn't go ahead, and that's why we've got Freedom Party of Victoria right now. But Glen Durery weighed in on our attempts at the time. Have a look at this. Australia's best known micro party strategist, all right, or I think he prefers preference whisperer, but anyway, Glen Durery told The Age, Reignite Democracy would find it difficult to distill divergent views of those protesting against lockdowns into a coherent political movement. And these are his words, quote, "You've got anti-vaxxer crackpots, you've got extreme anarchists, some religious types, and some more moderates coming from all different angles. Mr. Durery said, adding he would not work as a consultant for the new party because he could not endorse many of its philosophies. All right, now this is actually a pretty interesting statement he made, because it wasn't long after that I got an SMS on my phone, and it was from Glen Durery. That's right, he wanted to meet and talk about the potential for me starting a political party. That's right, after these remarks, anti-vaxxer crackpots and extreme anarchists. And no joke, we met, we talked. He suggested that I start a micro party and name it something to the effect of the anti-lockdown party. I never went ahead with his advice or worked with him, but it just seemed kind of strange that he would not endorse the, quote, philosophies, but then gave me a call once he realized that I had a following that was growing, and I think that he saw numbers and thought it could potentially be a great opportunity to harvest a certain percentage of the vote to incorporate under his banner for the purpose of vote harvesting, which would of course fit in with his business model of preferences for cash. So very good, I would say a bullet dodged. And once again, Morgan, the team at Freedom Party, we will never exchange money for preferences. We do not consider it ethical. Alrighty, now moving along here. Doesn't pass the pub test. This was from 2021. Controversial preference whisperer Glen Durery faces new probity concerns after landing a taxpayer-funded role working for State Upper House Liberal Democrats MP David Limbrick while running his own lucrative cash for votes business. All right, so sounding pretty similar to what happened in the past, of course, with the Motor Enthusiasts Party, or whatever it was called, and also the Justice Party. Goes on to say, Mr. Durery's business brings micro-parties together in a block to preference each other and leapfrog better supported parties. The practice helped Mr. Limbrick get elected in the 2018 poll with just 0.8% of the primary vote. Alrighty, so yeah, definitely raising a few eyebrows there from many people. Moving along here, just a little bit of a tidbit of information. Glen Durery is reported to live on a 55-foot yacht in Sydney. All right, so he's not even from Victoria, but come election time, he's got no problem packing up his bags, coming down, pocketing, an easy few $100 grand, and then he's on his way. And then we're left with people like Rod Barton in the crossbench. Or anyway, let's keep this moving along. All right, so quite brazen, really. And by the way, this is no secret, anything that I'm talking about. This is all out in the public. All I'm doing is just getting the information together and presenting it to you so you can make up your own mind about this particular practice. Anyway, here's an article from 2018. Hire me and get into Parliament. The preference whisperer's message. Alrighty, so okay, so here he is right there. I'm just going to read a little bit from this article for you. This is in relation to the prior Victorian state election. It appears that Durery was as good as his boast. That's right. He does like to boast about his capability to get people elected on very, very small percentages of the vote. The 8 MPs understood to be in his stable won seats with primary votes as low as 0.6%, as in Rod Barton from Transport Matters. They are among a record number of parties overall who are now represented in the upper house. 11 were elected in November compared to 8 in 2014 and only 4 in 2010. All right, so he doesn't just talk Glen Durery, he comes through with the goods, which I dare say is not a good thing at all. It goes on to say here, Miss Patton, Fiona Patton, had been a beneficiary of Durery's skills. All right, I mean, skills probably needs to be put in inverted commas, because the truth is it's not that hard. You can look at past election results, you can determine what percentage of the vote that certain micro parties are likely to attain, and then what you do is you get out a calculator, you punch some figures in, you work out how much is it to make a quota in the upper house, you get your phone, you get on the phone to these parties, you talk amongst all of them, you organise the preferences, you calculate the predicted outcome for each party, and then you too can be a preference whisperer. Guys, it's actually not that hard, and if you'd like me to make an MCJ report where I show you exactly how this works, I'm happy to do it. All right? I mean, start a micro party, get 500 members, start wheeling and dealing. Honestly, it's an absolute joke. All right, so where are we? Miss Patton was a beneficiary back in 2014, won Northern Metro, and reported to have paid $20,000 to Durery to work on those preferences. Goes on to say here that documents obtained by the age include a form to be completed and signed by shooters, fishers and farmers candidates. The form requires a signed commitment from successful candidates to pay an independent consultant. Not sure who that might be, but anyway, $30,000 over 2 years. Shooters party insiders have confirmed the consultant referred to jury. Wow, what a surprise! Oh my goodness. All right, so the candidate replacing Young in Northern Regions, Tim Coulty of the Liberal Democrats, confirmed the party had given a verbal agreement to contribute $30,000 to his services and an upfront payment of $5,000 for each of the candidates. Also, taxi industry-based Transport Matters also confirmed paying jury, including an upfront payment of $5,000, and the successful candidate, Rod Barton, would not detail how much he paid for securing his Eastern Metropolitan seat, but it seems likely that it would have been in the vicinity of $30,000. Fiona Patten has actually put on record that the fee proposed to her was in excess of $50,000. So Patten reported $55,000. These guys here are saying $30,000, so it's probably safe to say it could be somewhere in the middle. Not too sure, and I've never been involved in any of these contracts before, and I certainly don't intend to. All right, who else do we have here? Who else are the other people in the zoo? The Dick Smith-based Sustainable Australia also won a seat, effectively taking the Greens' place in Southern Metropolitan Region. Party spokesman William Burke confirmed that consultants had assisted his party's campaign, but would not confirm if Mr. Dury was among them. The Age understands Mr. Dury was in fact one of those consultants for a fee of at least $30,000. And now this is interesting here. This is the kicker. All right. Despite having to negotiate a larger upper house crossbench, Premier Daniel Andrews will likely find it easier to pass legislation needing just 3 votes in the Parliament compared to 7 in the previous term. Now remember, this article was published in 2018. So the prediction made here by Royce Miller and Benjamin Praise and Ben Schneiders about Daniel Andrews having an easier time, well, he was absolutely correct in that prediction, because as demonstrated throughout the past 3 years, especially during this time of COVID, Daniel Andrews has been able to, I suppose, very easily weave his way through the crossbench in the upper house. And we're now in a position where we have the Pandemic Management Amendment, and the government has extraordinary power to the likes of which we've never seen before. All right, now there's one other player that you might be wondering about. His name is Andy Medic, so I thought I better include Andy in this. And now Andy Medic is an interesting story here from the Animal Justice Party. Nobody knows who he is, where he came from, but all of a sudden he gets elected to the Victorian Upper House on a whopping 2.71% of the vote, yet has claimed that his party has done no deals with jury. That's right. So what do you think? Do you think Andy Medic's telling the truth? It goes on to say that it had made it clear to Mr. Dury that he was not going to use him as a negotiator with other micro parties on where the party's preferences would go. All right, so Andy Medic saying, no, didn't use him, didn't allow my preferences to be used in ways that I didn't want. What do you think, folks? Put your thoughts in the comments. All right, so I'd like to go through a bit of a case study here before we wrap this up. And this is in regards to the Eastern Metropolitan Region, where Rod Barton, who has admitted to commissioning the services of Glen Durery, was able to get elected on just 0.6% of the vote. Now, it's very important to point out that the vast majority of votes that were harvested and shoveled towards Rod Barton were from people who didn't know who Rod Barton was. They wouldn't vote for him because they had no idea what he was like or how he would likely behave in Parliament. This, of course, once again, is the result of the group voting ticket system in Victoria, and the fact that often voters will put a number one above the line, not often actually, the vast majority of the time, and have their votes transferred to someone they've never heard about and somebody they would never vote for. All right, so Rod Barton. So he did the deal with Dury, and as a result of that deal, he was able to accumulate second preferences from 8 parties. Okay, so try to picture this. He got 0.6% of the vote, but then you've got one party to the left throwing him a couple of %, a party from the right throwing him a couple more %. It built up, equated to a quota. Rod Barton gets elected, steps out of the taxi where he was a taxi driver, straight into the upper house. That's right. and straight into the negotiating room with Daniel Andrews. Yeah, democracy in action, guys. Alrighty, so let's have a bit of a look at this Eastern Metropolitan region. All right, so he got the second preferences. So Liberal Democrats gave him their second. Australian Liberty Alliance gave him their second. Darren Hinch's Justice Party gave Barton their second. Shooters, Fishers, Farmers, second. Sustainable Australia, second preference. Transport Matters going off to Rod Barton. The Aussie Battler Party gave their second to Transport Matters. Hudson for NV gave him their second. Health Australia Party also gave good old Rodney Brian Barton their second. And yeah, so there you go. So now it's probably starting to make more sense, whereby certain candidates in certain regions can pay a fee, and all of these micro parties that are dealing with Durery will flow their preferences into said candidate in said reason for the objective of getting said candidate elected. And I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, that I don't like this system. I don't like it. I think it's deceitful. I think it's underhanded. And I think that it's dangerous. Never should a voter be in a position whereby their vote ends up in the hands of a candidate or party that they would never vote for on their own accord. Okay, you need to remember that when voters head into the polls, they tend to preference parties in accordance with their ideological political outlook. This is just reckless, ladies and gentlemen. So I say that the jury's out. I say that it's time for electoral change in Victoria so that we can do away with this underhanded practice forever. We don't need people like Glen Durery coming down from Sydney, racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars at our expense. And we certainly don't need a situation where the Victorian public is used and deceived. I mean, just imagine how upset you would be if you were volunteering for say, a party because they want to get rid of hunting, only to realise that your votes ended up getting transferred to a party that wants more hunting. Or just imagine that you voted for a party that you thought was standing up for your freedoms and for you to live a free life, only for your votes to be transferred to a party that wants more government and more regulations. It's not right. It's not on. The Victorian government needs to get in line with the rest of the states and territories in Australia and do away with this process, the group voting ticket, and to criminalise the exchange of money for preferences so that the Victorian public can have confidence in relation to where their vote is going. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, this is the piece. I hope that it was informative. Allow me to express that here at Freedom Party of Victoria, we will not be engaging in these practices. We will not pay money for preferences, and we will do something unlike many other parties by publishing our group voting ticket ahead of time. That's right. So when you vote for Freedom Party of Victoria, above the line on the upper house ticket, you will have full knowledge where the preferences are going, and we will order our preferences in a way that is ethical and in a manner which reflects our political ideological outlooks, so that the wool is not pulled under your eyes should you decide to vote for us. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful. Morgan C. Jonas signing out.
Mm-hmm.